This is the Samsung Galaxy Note 2 AMOLED replacement, not to be confused with LCD, and we're going to give this a 5 out of 10 difficulty. Pretty easy repair assuming you have the right tools and you can follow the directions here in the video. And also that you purchase the entire front assembly with the mid-frame attached to the AMOLED display. I highly recommend you do this. It'll cost a couple bucks more, but it'll make your life much easier than having to pry off of your old mid-frame. So we're going to start by removing the battery cover. On the top left-hand corner in the back of the phone, you'll see that there's a tab where you can remove the battery cover. And then we'll go ahead and take the battery out. Make sure you remove your micro SD and your micro SIM before you get started. And then we're going to have a total of 11 screws that go around the perimeter, and well, actually 9 on the perimeter and 2 towards the center that we'll have to remove. Go ahead and take your S Pen out also before you get started. And we'll magnetize as usual. A lot of these screws tend to stick inside of the phone, so a little bit of magnetism will help. Sometimes you'll actually have to pry them out, or if you want to leave them inside, you can do so, but just go ahead and put a piece of tape over the outside, like some Scotch tape will hold them in place once you've loosened them. Just make sure you back them out all the way. That way when you pull the frame off, they don't go flying across the room. But you can see here in the video, I just went ahead and removed all of the screws, except for that one, apparently. So this has a kind of a different design than some of the previous Galaxy devices. You're going to have to go between the edge of the screen here and the bezel and just kind of work around here with a very shallow pry until these pop out of place. You should not have to apply a lot of pressure, and notice that I'm not putting any pressure on the center of the screen. Even though we are replacing it, I don't really want to shatter the AMOLED and make a mess, and there's a possibility we might be able to salvage that for something later on. So also take care around your volume buttons. Don't go in too deep here. You just want to be very careful as you go around the perimeter so you don't cut any cables or run into any of the buttons. And we'll go ahead and continue around the bottom at this point, just until it pops off of the front. And then you'll notice that you can just kind of pull this off from the back. And you'll have to go inside the battery compartment sometimes and pry the inner edge of this rear panel kind of towards the center of where the battery would be, because it tends to get hooked on the inside there. So you notice here, I've actually released the outside, but we got to kind of push down right in there, and that releases that section. And sometimes you'll have to do the same thing on the inside, right next to where the battery terminals are, kind of towards the center. Just kind of pull it inwards. Right, like I'm doing there. You see I'm kind of pulling down towards the center of the battery compartment, and that'll kind of release it. Once we have the rear panel removed, we're going to have a series of flex cables and one screw that actually goes into the logic board. And then we've also got a screw down at the bottom assembly where the speaker mechanism is located. So we're going to take out this silver screw right down here. And that's going to remove the cover for our speaker, actually the ringer speaker entirely. And then we're going to have our antenna wire and then a couple of flex cables. This is the flex cable for the front buttons. And this is actually going to be for, honestly can't remember what that is. We'll have to see when we get the board pulled out. So go ahead and pop all these off, and then you'll have your AMOLED pop connector there at the top, and a couple other things. Here's one for the headset jack, and we're looking at the SIM and memory card tray, and the power button, and a couple other things are at the top that need to be disconnected. So make sure you get all of these pop connectors disconnected. You don't want to put any tension on them as you're removing the board. And technically you can leave the SIM card tray flex cable plugged in. That's not going to be a problem. It actually stays attached to the board. You see we have a couple of screws up there at the top that are also going to have to come out. This is one that holds the logic board onto the mid frame, so make sure you remove this one and make sure that you remember to put it back in when you finish. So at this point, you can kind of wiggle this out and just work your way around those cables as long as they're all disconnected. And you might have to assist the camera to get it to come out of the frame Once we do that, we've got the logic board pulled. Now we have a series of components that we have to remove from the mid-frame and transfer over to the new assembly. What you want to be really careful about is the speaker up there at the top. It's going to have a little bit of glue underneath it, so we'll use a combination of heat and some prying to get that to come out. Down here at the bottom, we're also going to heat up this board, and you want to be really careful when you go underneath this. This is for the charging port, and I think I said that that was a flex cable for the front button assembly. This is actually for the charging port, which is modular. Another nice feature of the Note 2, if you break your charging port, you can go inside here and just replace this entire piece. Not have to worry about doing any soldering. And with a little bit of heat, this should come out pretty easily. And that's going to set right there. And so I'm just going to transfer it over right now because we don't have to worry about anything blocking that. So you can set that in at this point. I could probably put that plastic cover on right now if I wanted to, but actually take that back. We're going to have to wait till the antenna is actually plugged in. So we'll just set this here for right now and then move on to removing the antenna wire itself. Be careful with this. It is a custom size made for this device. It's going to be hard to find one of these on another phone. You'll actually have to get one specifically for this device if you damage it. So be very careful. Make sure you route it through the channel on the side there. You can kind of see where that goes. And we'll plug that into the bottom here in a second. Make sure you get that lined up straight. If you put too much pressure on an antenna connector, you can actually damage it if it's not lined up properly. So make sure that just kind of snaps into place. And again, it's very important to route this thing down that little channel that they've made for the antenna wire. You want to make sure you don't pinch that when you're reassembling your Note 2. Up here at the top, we're going to heat this up a little bit. There are a few things that need to come out, and you're going to have to be really careful. There's a long cable that runs across this, if I remember correctly. Let's see, we'll start by removing the screw for the headset jack. And this one's pretty easy to get out. Just kind of pull that straight up. And it is actually attached to the earpiece speaker. So this is where you want to be careful. If you just yank that out, you're going to tear that cable and have to replace the whole thing. But very carefully, you should be able to get that out. And again, another nice modular component that's easy to replace on this device. You're going to have probably a little gasket up here, possibly a gasket. Take a look inside these things when you pull them out and make sure if there's any kind of rubber or plastic that goes underneath it. If it's missing from the assembly that you buy, be sure to transfer that over. This one's actually got that little white square at the top, so you don't have to worry about that. And we'll go ahead and put that screw in right now. And then move over to this next one on the top very left-hand side. You've got another screw you can remove. And this should be the front-facing camera, I believe. And it's actually got a little metal clip underneath where that screw was. So pull that aside, pull that off. Make sure you take note of the position that it goes in. You can heat this up a little bit. You're going to have some adhesive that's holding this to the mid-frame. And then we'll just kind of grip this from the side a little bit. We don't want to poke any holes in anything, but you can see that wasn't too hard to get off. And in fact, down inside here, there is a, this is actually for our proximity sensor. That little piece you're looking at on the right-hand side of the cable, and then we've got our front-facing camera on the left-hand side. Be sure to take out those little pieces of plastic. Nothing more annoying than putting it all together and you can't see your front-facing camera. And once we do that, we can kind of set it back in there. And then we'll go ahead and put this panel on the bottom here since we've got our antenna wire connected. And then we'll go ahead and put this metal plate back over the proximity sensor. And once we've got that in the right position, we'll put the screw back in. And now we can go ahead and put the board back into the device as soon as we move this other speaker over. Got ahead of myself there a bit. And we will have to also move our volume and power buttons from the old assembly over. And this is kind of a tricky part here. Let me not get ahead of myself too much here. Go very carefully under the speaker flex cable. Don't want to tear that. Don't want to poke any holes in it. We need it to all come out at one time. So be very careful as you're working underneath here. And sometimes I'll just grab an ice pick, and you'll see there's a little slot you can use here. And again, don't go too deep. Don't poke into the speaker, but you can just use it to pry this off so that it's separated from the mid-frame. And we'll transfer that straight across. Only one place that can go. It's pretty obvious. And the adhesive's still strong enough we can just go ahead and reuse that. And now we're going to go to our power button here. And you want to heat that up and just kind of work very carefully underneath it. Don't put a lot of tension on there. If it feels like it's sticking, you want to get something to kind of go underneath and separate it from the mid-frame. Very carefully. And probably something with a flat surface would work a little bit better. So we'll go under here with our pry tool and just kind of work that a little bit at a time. And you're going to need something relatively thin, so the metal pry tool that I used would have worked. I'm using a blade right now. As long as you're careful, don't poke anything, you'll be okay. Don't cut any cables, obviously. And we'll go ahead and set that. I like to transfer these things right away. That way there's very little risk that you're going to put it in the wrong position or forget where something goes. You can see I'm just setting the board on top of the antenna wire, but there's a little gap where it kind of routes out to the rear side of the logic board. And then you can always use the rear panel to check if you're not sure where that screw goes. If you don't see a screw hole in the rear panel, you know that that's the correct location for the one that goes into the logic board itself. So I've gone ahead and attached that. I'm going to plug in my antenna wire. And now we can go ahead and start plugging our flex cables in. And as far as the volume buttons, my mistake there. This one does not have separate volume flex cable. I actually did a an S3 right after this, so my memory's still fresh on that one. In any case, you've just got to move the power button over, plug in the remaining flex cables, and at this point, I think we're ready to go ahead and put the rear housing cover back on. But before we do that, I want to go ahead and test it. So we'll put the battery in, hit the power button, make sure this is going to light up so that we don't put a whole bunch of screws in here for nothing. And you can see we've got signs of life. So we'll go ahead and test the functionality, and as long as it's working, we are just about ready to put everything back together.